and get things started. When you think about working on your literature review, um, are you might be just getting started, you might be adding new content, or looking for a better way to organize. Maybe you've begun working in Endnote and you're wondering where to go next. During the literature review, you certainly can run into information overload. There's so much information to organize and keep track of. You'll always question, did you get everything? Was something missed? When you think about this process and you're looking at help for your bibliographic information, EndNote can help you efficiently organize your sources, access their information, and include your sources in your finished work. But what about capturing the connections? What happens when you want to capture connections between and among your various sources? What happens when you want to share that information with a colleague to get some? When you're looking for help finding connections, NVivo allows you to easily organize your sources, code or tag your information, use queries and other tools to help identify connections, and locate similarities and differences among your sources. So EndNote lets you easily locate pertinent resources, download bibliographic information and PDFs when available, organize references, create citations and bibliographies, and share your library. NVivo lets you easily identify frequently used terms, locate key terms in your various resources, code or tag important themes or concepts in your resources, track your thoughts and insights, and display your information easily to look across authors and themes. Together, they can provide a better quality for less effort, reduce reliance on memory and possibly missing important data, provide a framework to bring in more sources, let you go back quickly to rewrite and resubmit with ease, and avoid plagiarism, and protect your academic reputation. So I'd like to take a look at unleashing the power of EndNote and NVivo together. We'll take a look at stepping into both pieces of software, look at some of the key features that may be of use, and then we'll come back in to the PowerPoint. All right, let me go ahead and swap screens here. I'm going to swap out to EndNote. I'm using EndNote X7. What I've done here is I've brought together a sample collection of resources that I've gone out and started looking at, for example, diabetes management. And I've gone and collected these ideas. I brought them into EndNote and attached where available PDFs. So EndNote has allowed me to be able to manage getting this information in, getting the background, getting the bibliographic error, abstract if it's available, notes that are there. And I may want to, once I've done this part of it, want to then information into NVivo to start to take it apart. NVivo, of course, is known as a qualitative data analysis software tool, and in doing so, it basically is geared to work with unstructured non-numeric data. Basically, your literature review is working with unstructured non-numeric data, so that we have the ability to make use of it even before we get into the research itself. Again, I did mention I am using Endnote 7, X7. NVivo will work with X2 through X7. Once you have this information inside of your project, one of the things that you'll want to do is you'll want to be able to export it out of Endnote and into NVivo. Process is really quite simple. I can select the that I wish to export. So for some people who actually keep a continuous library of their professional articles, they can pick and choose the ones that they wish to send out. I'm going to go ahead now that I've selected them. I'll come in to a file and export. I'm going to export as my database library from X7. And when you send out of Endnote, you out as an XML file. You want to send it out as an XML file. I'll go ahead and click Save here. And once I've sent that piece out, I'll go ahead and to NVivo here. I'm using NVivo 10 with Service Pack 5 installed. I'm in the PC environment. I'm going to go ahead and start a new project here. I'm going to call this my Lit Review demo. And I'll just tack on today's date. I'll go ahead and click OK. And what NVivo does is it creates a project file. So any of the information or data I bring into my project comes into that particular file. Everything is stored in there. And the first thing that I might call attention to, for those of you who haven't worked with NVivo, you may notice that the workspace looks a little familiar. And with this workspace, it was modeled after Outlook. So if you've used Outlook for your calendar, contacts, etc., you actually have a foundational understanding of how the workspace functions. Anything I bring into NVivo, I'll put into my internals folder here. And in this case, I will bring in my file. Under the External Data tab, I'll come into the Import section and I will import from other sources. In this case, I'll import from Endnote. I'll go out and find the file. I'll go ahead and click Open. And I have an import from Endnote dialog box, so will let me set this up. I do have a choice here to come in from title or from author and year. I'm going to go ahead with author and year here. I'll talk a little bit about why I chose that in just a few minutes. I can also have classifications. And instead of just a single classification as reference, I'm going to use different classifications based on the record type that I've created. I'll be importing new sources here. I'll put any of the internals inside of the internals folder. We'll talk about what externals are in just a couple of minutes. I'll import sources and content from attachments. Create memos if from the abstract or keywords or notes, and assign attribute values to the memos if I wish. I'll go ahead and click Import, and NVivo begins the process of bringing these pieces in. Right now with NVivo, the ability to import into your project is available in NVivo 10, the PC version. It is not available in the Mac beta that's out at this point in time. What you'll notice here is now that I have brought this information in, I actually have a copy. If I had PDFs attached to my Endnote files here, I actually have access to them. I asked NVivo to bring them in so that I can begin working with these files and looking for particular pieces. The term that we saw earlier, externals, that was referring to sources that you have where there may not be a physical piece to bring in, an electronic version to go ahead and bring in. And in this case, what NVivo does with the externals is it goes and it creates what could be considered a proxy document. Basically, it gives me a place where I can take notes and have those notes inside of my project and be able to code them just like I would any other type of data. When I brought in my internals, I want to show you what also came in. If I right-click on any of my PDFs here, I'll bring in and look at my PDF properties. Under the attribute values, I actually have any of the bibliographic information that was available in Endnote is now available inside of NVivo. So if I want to be able to try to find sources that meet a certain criteria, I have that ability to do just that. I can use these attributes to find project items that match certain characteristics. The other thing that was created during the time that they were being brought in were memos. And if you have already begun creating your EndNote file and you've brought in things like attributes and you've made, abstracts and you've made notes, they don't get lost. What happens when I open up the memo, I'll find if the abstract was available, I'll find the abstract there, I'll find keywords there, I'll find notes. Those pieces will all be there, and then I can go ahead and add my own thoughts about this as appropriate as I go through. I can always go into edit my thing, and as I continue, collect my thoughts. One of the reasons that I really like to have this material available to be able to be in NVivo, I will often have a lot of information that I'm trying to get through. And I have some tools inside of NVivo that can help me do just that. For example, one of the queries that we have is a word frequency query. Perhaps I want to see what are my most frequently used words across these sources. I can do just that. I'll look at all my sources right here. Perhaps I want to see what my top 100 words are. I'll go ahead and run this. And I get a list of the most frequently used words as I look forward, as I look at what I brought into my project. One of the nice things with NVivo, if there are words on there that aren't necessarily helping you to get a better idea, for example, diabetes, of course, would be the most frequently used one. For this particular project, I might want to add that to my stop words list for right now. and then be able to just quickly from the query section bring back the last run query, and then that word will come off of that piece. One of the frequently used visualizations that is available comes from the word frequency. Once you've run this, you can actually create a word cloud. There's a tab on the far right-hand side. So NVivo will take the words that you've included and create the visual word cloud for you. This word cloud, you can right-click and you can export the word cloud, so you can use it in presentations, drop it in a PowerPoint, drop it in a Word file if you wish. There are a number of different options for how you would want to present it. And you also have the list itself, which can be exported out to, say, Excel, if you have another purpose that you'd like to use it for. Right now, just wanted to clarify one point. Right now, importing with the Mac version of NVivo, you cannot import from Endnote at this time. Right now, it is on the list of features that will be brought in. There will be a number of service packs that are being established, but at this point, I don't know the exact point in time when that feature will be added. In this case, when I go back, one quick thing I just want to mention with the word cloud, when the PDFs have readable text, as most of them do, it goes through the text of the PDF to be able to bring this information in. So we're not looking at the bibliographic information here, we're looking at the text from the PDFs themselves. When you're looking at this, one of the reasons people will like to do this is it will, when you're heading into a project, you may have certain key terms that you know that you're working with, or sometimes you may be able to run a word frequency like this, and certain terms may pop out at you that you start to look at and say, I hadn't thought about that one. Maybe I need to go and I need to do some digging and look a little bit deeper. That's where another tool comes in very handy. Still under the query option, I can use a query called the text search query. And if there are certain terms that I'm looking for, so for instance, I'll put in the word insulin, and I can go ahead and look through the text of all my sources. In my query options, I can take the results and turn them into a node if I wish, and I just want to tell you what a node is. In NVivo, a node is a bin or a bucket. It's a place where I can pull together certain passages that may surround or support a certain concept, theme, or idea. In this case, if I'm using the text search query, I may have keywords that will fit with certain themes that I'm looking for, and NVivo will go out and find those keywords, gather them together, and then I can look at the results and begin to weed out any that don't belong and start to get a sense of what might be there, what might be some sub-patterns in those themes. I can also choose to preview. And in this case, I am going to preview this one, and I'm going to spread the coding to none because I want to show you a particular tool that is only available in this setup here. Let me go ahead and click Run. NVivo goes through and it now shows me all of the places where the word insulin was found. I have a list of references so that I can begin to see the source and how that word was used. In the reference view, I have a list of all of the references so that I can start to review this to look for subcategories or sub-themes as I'm working through. Also, any of the dividers that appear as I'm looking through this, I can also use those to link back to my original source. The piece that I wanted to show you, though, was the word tree. When I do the word search and text search query, preview it, and don't spread the coding, I will get a word tree. So in this case, insulin has been placed in the center. And initially, it's showing me the 5 words leading into and the 5 words coming out of that word insulin for all of the sources that I asked it to search through. This is a way for me to do a very quick check of how this word is being used. It gives me a nice 10,000-foot view of this piece. What I also appreciate about this too is that if there are some key words, for example, a number of my outcomes from insulin go to the word resistance. And if I'd like to do a little bit more searching, I can right-click on the word resistance and I can run another text search query right from here. And NVivo will go back through those same sources that I asked it to look at and will now find the term insulin resistance. So I can now see where the term insulin resistance has been used across my sources. If I come back to my original word search here, if I come back to my text search, if I decide I'd like to turn this into a node, I certainly can. I can quickly come back to the query section. I can store the query results as a node. The downside with this, for this particular example, is that I used a preview, so it only coded a single word. In this case, what I'll do is I'll bring back my last run query, and for my query options, instead of previewing it, I'll turn it into a node. And I'll put it in my nodes folder. I'll call this insulin. And I'll ask NVivo not just to code a single word, but to code a narrow context, which will automatically give me 5 words on either time, on either side. I'll go ahead and click Run. And I've now gone and in my node section here, I've created a node called insulin. So it has information from 13 sources, and there are 505 references right now. I'm going to just quickly repeat those steps. I'd like to create a couple of more nodes here to help me out with the next section. So I'm just going to quickly do a text search query. And this time I'm going to look for diet or exercise. And I will save that as a new node. Put it in the nodes folder. Just call it diet or exercise. And I'll just repeat one more time. In this case, I'll do medication. Depending on the words that you're using, you do have a finding matches, so you can do exact matches. You could use stemmed words. You can also look for synonyms, and under synonyms, you could look for specializations or generalizations. There's a lot of different options that you have. I'm going to quickly keep this one just as medication. Create the results as a new node. And I'll call this one medication. The reason I did this was I wanted to be able to do some comparisons, especially looking across my authors. One way that I can set myself up to do that is to go back to my sources here, my PDFs, for example, and I can turn each of my PDFs into a node. I can create a node from each of my PDFs. And that's why I actually had brought it in using the author's name. I brought it in using the author's name so that I could select my sources and create as case notes. And I'll put that in my nodes folder for right now. What this allows me to do is to make use of two of our other features. One is the matrix coding query. This is a place where I can create a matrix where each of my rows can be a different author. So I'll go into my nodes here. And I'll go ahead and select the authors that I have. I'll go ahead and click OK and add those to my list. I can now look at my columns, and in this case, each column you can make a different topic for which you've coded. So for instance, I'll go ahead and go into my nodes folder here, and this time I'll select the three nodes that I've created based on key terms or themes or topics that I'm looking for. I'll go ahead and run this. And what NVivo is doing now, it's creating a matrix. Initially, it's showing me the number of references I have for each author at each topic. In this way, I can initially start to get a sense of which authors seem to gravitate towards which topics. If I want to get a little bit easier view of where some of the highs and lows are, I can use some color coding to help me do just that. I can export this table if I wish, export the matrix out to Excel. When I do create a matrix inside of NVivo, I also get a chart. And I do have a couple of options depending on how I want to look at the chart. I can do just that. Another nice piece with this is I can right-click and export this chart and use it in a presentation. I'll come back to my matrix here because one of the key things with the matrix is not only do I have a sort of quantitative view and I can look at patterns or trends in there. If I'd like to see the data behind the number, I simply need to double click on the cell and NVivo will show me the data. So if it says it has 8 references, I double click on the cell and I can see all 8 references. I've got all of those pieces right there for me. I also, with the matrix, I can change what the values in the cells mean. I could change it to number of sources coded or nodes coded if I wished, the number of words coded, duration if I'm using audio video material. Row percentage will show me what percentage out of all of the data coded in a given row, what percentage is represented by each of the cells. And the same thing is true for the column percentage. Out of all of the data in a given column, what percentage is represented by a given cell. And if I'm just interested whether there was coding presence or not, I can simply go with a yes or no option. So this gives me another way that I can start to look at my data, see what my authors are talking about, keep this in mind as I'm going into my writing. With that piece in mind, there is another tool. It's another matrix, but it's referred to as a framework matrices. It's referred to as a framework matrices. It's under the sources section. It's under the sources section here. And the thing that I like about the framework matrix, the framework matrices, what I can do is I can create a framework matrix. I'm going to call this my author comparison. In the rows, I can place the node that I have for each of my authors. The one thing about the framework matrix is it does require the rows to be made up of nodes. That's why I had to turn the sources into nodes. So in this case, I'll go ahead and I'll just quickly choose, actually I'll just do a sampling here. And then for my columns, once again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use, in this case, my types of mediation. And I'm going to go ahead at this point and click OK. You'll notice that NVivo has created for me a matrix. But the thing about this is if I come up to, I believe it's Analyze here. If I come up to Analyze and I come over to Auto Summarize, what NVivo does is it will populate each of those cells with any of the data that I have coded. So basically what I have just created for myself, pardon me, is a graphic organizer. So I can see what each author, if I look across a row, I can see how the same author talked about different topics. If I look down a given column, I can see how different authors spoke about the same topic. And when I'm working in the framework matrix, if I wish, I can also go ahead and add my own thoughts. And basically, I'm preparing myself to be able to look at the task of putting this into writing. And I can even, if I wish, change the color of my text. That being said, this framework matrix I can also export. I can export the framework matrix and I can send it out to Excel. And that way, if I have a colleague or colleagues that maybe do not have NVivo, but I want to get some feedback from them, I do have the ability to do just that. Go out to my desktop here and author comparison. And I now have that information available to me in that format. Okay. And in this case, right now I've used the phrases because what I've done is I've gone through and just very quickly used my keyword search and narrow spread to be able to gather this information together. Typically, if this were an actual project that I was working on at the moment, what I would have done is after I had used the auto coding, after I'd used the text search query, I would have gone back in and tried to send that information, to expand that information to the full extent of the meaning. So that certainly is an option that you're going about there. And when I'm sending this out, I can send it out as a text file or as an Excel file because it is set up as basically as an Excel or table file. Again, these are just some of the pieces that can be used. So I can take this into NVivo, begin working with it, give myself, say, a written outline. I may also be able to create, there are other visualizations that I can create, cluster analysis. So if I wanted to see which authors, based on their word similarity, cluster near each other, I do have the ability to do just that. So I may look at my sources here, and I can pick and choose a number of my different sources and look at them for word similarity. It does allow me to use it uses the Pearson correlation coefficient, but I also have access to Jaccard's and Sorensen's if I wish. I can go ahead and click Finish. And what NVivo is doing is it's actually comparing each article to every other article, and it's generating for me initially a dendrogram. And the closer two sources are to each other on the dendrogram, the more similar they were, the similar the words that they were using. So another way that I can get a chance to take a look at some of my information here and be able to look at it from a variety of perspectives. If you want to find out more about Endnote, please visit Endnote, www.endnote.com, as well as for NVivo, www.qsrinternational.com.